Mary Poppins by P.L. Travers, Chapter 3, Bad Wednesday. Tick-tack, tick-tock. The pendulum of the nursery clock swung backwards and forwards like an old lady nodding her head. Tick-tack, tick-tock. Then the clock stopped ticking and began to whir and growl, quietly at first and then more loudly as though it were in pain. Then it whirred and shook so violently that the whole mantelpiece trembled. The empty marmalade jar hopped and shook and shivered. John's hairbrush, left there overnight, danced on its bristles. The royal Dalton bowl that Mrs. Banks' great-aunt Caroline had given her as a christening present slipped sideways so that the three little boys who were playing horses inside it stood on their painted heads. And after all that, just when it seemed as if the clock must burst, it began to strike. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. On the last stroke, Jane woke up. The sun was streaming in through the gap in the curtains and falling in gold stripes upon her quilt. Jane sat up and looked around the nursery. No sound came from Michael's bed. The twins in their cots were sucking their thumbs and breathing deeply. "I'm the only one awake," she said, feeling very pleased. "Everybody in the world is asleep except me. I can lie here all by myself and think and think and think." And she drew her knees up to her chin and curled into the bed, as though she were settling down into a nest. "Now I am a bird," she said to herself. "I have just laid 7 lovely white eggs, and am sitting with my wings over them, brooding. Cluck, 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 cluck." She made a small, broody noise in her throat. "And after a long time, say half an hour, there will be a little cheep and a little tap, and the shells will crack, and out will pop 7 little chicks. 3 yellow, 2 brown, and 2... Time to get up!" Mary Poppins, appearing suddenly from nowhere, tweaked the bedclothes from Jane's shoulders. "No, no, no!" grumbled Jane, pulling them up again. She felt very cross with Mary Poppins for rushing in and spoiling everything. "I don't want to get up," she said, turning her face into the pillow. "Oh, indeed," Mary Poppins said calmly, as though the remark had no interest for her. She pulled the bedclothes right off the bed, and Jane found herself standing on the floor. "Oh, dear," she grumbled. "Why do I always have to get up first?" "You're the eldest, that's why." Mary Poppins pushed her toward the bathroom. "But I don't want to be the eldest. Why can't Michael be the eldest sometimes?" "Because you were born first, see?" "Well, I didn't ask to be. I'm tired of being born first. I wanted to think." "You can think while you're brushing your teeth." "Not the same thoughts." "Well, nobody wants to think the same thoughts all the time. I do." Mary Poppins gave her a quick black look. "That's enough, thank you." And from the tone in her voice, Jane knew she meant what she said. Mary Poppins hurried away to wake Michael. Jane put down her toothbrush and sat on the edge of the bath. "It isn't fair," she grumbled, kicking the linoleum with her toes. "Making me do all the horrid things just because I'm the eldest. I won't brush my teeth." Immediately she felt surprised at herself. She was usually quite glad to be older than Michael and the twins. It made her feel rather superior and much more important. But today, what was the matter with today that she felt so cross and peevish? "If Michael had been born first, I'd have had time to hatch out my eggs," she grumbled to herself, feeling that the day had begun badly. Unfortunately, instead of getting better, it grew worse. At breakfast, Mary Poppins discovered there was only enough puffed rice for 3. "Well, Jane must have porridge," she said, setting out the plates and sniffing angrily, for she did not like making porridge. There were always too many lumps in it. "But why?" complained Jane. "I want puffed rice." Mary Poppins darted a fierce look at her. "Because you're the eldest." There it was again, that hateful word. She kicked the leg of the chair under the table, hoping she was scratching off the varnish, and ate her porridge as slowly as she dared. She turned it round and round in her mouth, swallowing as little as possible. It would serve everybody right if she starved to death. Then they'd be sorry. "What is today?" inquired Michael cheerfully, scraping up the last of his puffed rice. "Wednesday," said Mary Poppins. "Leave that pattern on the plate, please." "Then it's today we're going to tea with Miss Lark." "If you're good," said Mary Poppins darkly, as though she did not believe such a thing were possible. But Michael was in a cheerful mood and took no notice. "Wednesday!" he shouted, banging his spoon on the table. "That's the day Jane was born. Wednesday's child is full of woe. That's why she has to have porridge instead of rice," he said naughtily. Jane frowned and kicked at him under the table, but he swung his legs aside and laughed. "Monday's child is fair of face, Tuesday's child is full of grace," he chanted. "That's true, too. The twins are full of grace. They were born on a Tuesday. And I'm Monday, fair of face." Jane laughed scornfully. "I am," he insisted. "I heard Mrs. Brill say so. She told Ellen I was as handsome as half a crown." "Well, that's not very handsome," said Jane. "Besides, your nose turns up." Michael looked at her reproachfully, and again Jane felt surprised at herself. At any other time she would have agreed with him, for she thought Michael a very good-looking little boy. But now she said cruelly, "Yes, and your toes turn in. Bandy legs, bandy legs." Michael rushed at her. "That would be enough from you," said Mary Poppins, looking angrily at Jane. "And if anybody in this house is a beauty, it's—" She paused and glanced with a satisfied smile at her own reflection in the mirror. "Who?" demanded Michael and Jane together. "Nobody of the name of Banks," retorted Mary Poppins. "So there." Michael looked across at Jane as he always did when Mary Poppins made one of her curious remarks. But though she felt his look, she pretended not to notice. She turned away and took her paint box from the toy cupboard. "Won't you play trains?" asked Michael, trying to be friendly. "No, I won't. I want to be by myself." Well, darlings, and how are you all this morning?" Mrs. Banks came running into the room and kissed them hurriedly. She was always so busy that she never had time to walk. "Michael," she said, "you must have some new slippers. Your toes are coming out at the top. Mary Poppins, John's curls will have to come off, I'm afraid. Barbara, my pet, don't suck your thumb. Jane, run downstairs and ask Mrs. Brill not to ice the plum cake. I want a plain one." There they were again, breaking into her day. As soon as she began to do anything, they made her stop and do something else. "Oh, Mother, must I? Why can't Michael?" Mrs. Banks looked surprised. "But I thought you liked helping, and Michael always forgets the message. Besides, you're the eldest. Run along." She went downstairs as slowly as she could. She hoped that she would be so late with the message that Mrs. Brill would have already iced the cake. And all the time she felt astonished at the way she was behaving. It was as if there was another person inside her, somebody with a very bad temper and an ugly face, who was making her feel cross. She gave the message to Mrs. Brill and was disappointed to find out she was in plenty of time. "Well, that'll save a pennyworth of trouble anyway," Mrs. Brill remarked. "And dearie," she went on, "you might just slip out into the garden and tell that Robertson he hasn't done the knives. My legs are bad, and they're my only pair. "I can't, I'm busy." It was Mrs. Brill's turn to look surprised. "Ah, be a kind girl, then. That's all I can do to stand, let alone walk," Jane sighed. Why couldn't they leave her alone? She kicked the kitchen door shut and dawdled out into the garden. Robertson A was asleep on the path with his head on the watering can. His lank hair rose and fell as he snored. It was Robertson A's special gift that he could sleep anywhere at any time. In fact, he preferred sleeping to waking, and usually, whenever they could, Jane and Michael prevented him from being found out. But today was different. The bad-tempered person inside her didn't care a bit what happened to Robertson A. "I hate everybody," she said as she rapped sharply on the watering can. Robertson A sat up with a start. "Help! Fire! Murder!" he cried, waving his arms wildly. Then he rubbed his eyes and saw Jane. "Oh, it's only you," he said in a disappointed voice, as if he had hoped for something more exciting. "You're to go and do the knives at once," she ordered. Robertson A got slowly to his feet and shook himself. "Ah," he said sadly, "it's always something. If it's not one thing, it's another. I ought to be resting. I never get a moment of peace." "Yes, you do," said Jane cruelly. "You get nothing but peace. You're always asleep." A hurt, reproachful look came over Robertson A's face. And at any other time it would have made her feel ashamed, but today she wasn't a bit sorry. "Saying such things," said Robertson A sadly, "and you're the eldest and all. I wouldn't have thought it. Not if I'd done nothing but think for the rest of my life." He gave her a sorrowful glance and shuffled slowly away to the kitchen. She wondered if he would ever forgive her, and as if in reply, the sulky creature inside her head said, "I don't care if he doesn't." She tossed her head and went slowly back to the nursery, dragging her sticky hands along the fresh white wall, because she had always been told not to. Mary Poppins was flicking her feather duster round the furniture. "Off to a funeral?" she inquired as Jane appeared. Jane looked sulky and did not answer. I know somebody who's looking for trouble, and he that seeks shall find. I don't care. Don't care was made care. Don't care was hung, jeered Mary Poppins, putting the duster away. And now, she looked warningly at Jane, I am going to have my dinner. You are to look after the little ones. And if I hear one word— She did not finish the sentence, but gave a long, threatening sniff as she went out of the room. John and Barbara ran to Jane and caught her hands, but she uncurled their fingers and crossly pushed them away. I wish I were an only child, she said bitterly. Why don't you run away? Suggested Michael. Somebody might adopt you. Jane looked up, startled and surprised. But you'd miss me. No, I wouldn't, he said stoutly. Not if you're always going to be cross. Besides, then I could have your paint box. No, you couldn't, she said jealously. I'd take it with me. And just to show him that the paint box was hers and not his, she got out the brushes and the painting book and spread them on the floor. Paint the clock, said Michael helpfully. No. Well, the Royal Dalton bow. Jane glanced up. The three little boys were racing over the field inside the green rim of the bowl. At any other time she would have liked to paint them, but today she was not going to be pleasant or obliging. I won't. I will paint what I want. And she began to make a picture of herself, quite alone, brooding over her eggs. Michael, John, and Barbara sat on the floor watching. Jane was so interested in her eggs that she almost forgot her bad temper. Michael leaned forward. Why not put in a hen, just there? He pointed to a spare white patch, brushing against John with his arm. Over went John, falling sideways and upsetting the cup with his foot. The colored water splashed out and flooded the picture. With a cry, Jane sprang to her feet. Oh, I can't bear it! You great clumsy! You've spoilt everything! And rushing at Michael, she punched him so violently that he, too, toppled over and crashed down on top of John. A squeal of pain and terror broke from the twins, and above their cries rose Michael's voice wailing, My head is broken! What shall I do? My head is broken! Over and over again. I don't care! I don't care! Shouted Jane. You wouldn't leave me alone, and you've spoilt my picture. I hate you! I hate you! I hate— The door burst open. Mary Poppins surveyed the scene with furious eyes. What did I say to you? She inquired to Jane in a voice so quiet that it was terrible. That if I heard one word— And now look what I find. A nice party you'll have at Miss Lark's, I don't think. Not one step will you go out of this room this afternoon, or I'm a Chinaman. I don't want to go. I'd rather stay here. Jane put her hands behind her back and sauntered away. She did not feel a bit sorry. Very good. Mary Poppins' voice was gentle, but there was something very frightening in it. Jane watched her dressing the others for the party. And when they were ready, Mary Poppins took her best hat out of a brown paper bag and set it on her head at a very smart angle. She clipped her gold locket round her neck, and over it wound the red and white checkered scarf Mrs. Banks had given her. At one end was stitched a white label marked with a large M.P. for Mary Poppins, and Mary Poppins smiled at herself in the mirror as she tucked the label out of sight. Then she took her parrot-handled umbrella from the cupboard